Let's talk.
John Brown.
Terror Over Africa is the astonishing tale about a flight of fear, terror, and a horrific near-death experience afterwards. It is a true story, and is written by Stanley Stewart. I'm delighted to say that Stanley joins me live on the line now. Stanley, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Just tell us a little bit about this story, and indeed the cover-up, and your relationship to it.
Well, I've been an aviation writer for some time, and I knew the captain that was on this event quite well. So many years ago, we sat down together to write this story, and that's where it came from in my part. So I'm really the messenger to tell everyone about this. But it happened way back in the year 2000 on the 29th of December.
Right.
And so this 29th coming up now is the 25th anniversary of the event.
And so tell me a little bit about because it's dubbed the Nairobi incident. So is that a bit of a spoiler alert? Is this happening? Is this a flight going to Nairobi from Nairobi? Is it an Air Lagos flight? Tell me a little bit about, or an Air Nigeria flight. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yes, there was a young Kenyan who was studying in Lyon University, and he was making his way back to Kenya. And so he first flew from there to London Gatwick, and then he picked up a British Airways flight, the BA 2069, and then he flew from there to, the flight then flew from there to Nairobi with him on board. And he was the gentleman that was a little bit disturbed and who caused the fracas.
You say caused the fracas. In my list of great understatements of 2025, I had it all mapped out before Christmas, and now you've come up with that one saying a bit of a fracas. This is terrifying. So the plane itself, is it a 747? What are we talking about here?
It was a 747, yes, and it was absolutely packed, over 400 on board. Very busy flight, and this happened at the worst possible time.
So what? We're 30,000 feet, and just explain the situation just before the quote-unquote fracas takes place then.
Okay, so the aircraft's flying at 37,000 feet
right
over Sudan, and it's got about 3 hours to land at Nairobi. Everything's very quiet. For these flights, they would put the blinds down. The cabin crew would put the blinds down because the sun would come up quite early at 5 o'clock in the morning. So it was dark on board. It had been a very smooth flight with no problems at all. And then suddenly, this Kenyan gentleman decided to have a little wander around, and he tried to crash the aeroplane.
I mean, This is post 9/11, so I mean, I'm thinking at this point. Then, so he's not. Is he in first class? Is he at the back with the rest of us? I mean, what?
No. He was right at the back of the aircraft.
Okay.
Sitting on an aisle seat, so he could get up and down quite easily.
Yeah.
And he was wandering around throughout the flight, causing some problems. But unfortunately, none of this information reached the captain.
Yeah. When you say causing some problems, was he? I mean, he's not in the best mental state. Did passengers and the cabin crew not think, hello, we've got to keep an eye on this one? And again, it's a big aircraft. If he's going to get up to the front, to the business end of the plane, if you like, and all those who are in telemetrics are going, no, that's not the business end, but you know what I'm saying here. I mean, how does he manage to get, from the back of the plane through first class and then into the cockpit itself?
Yes, well, it was very quiet at that time, and quite a few of the crew would be having rest periods, so it wouldn't be a full crew. He'd also been bothering the crew throughout the flight, asking strange things like, where's the flight deck and how do you hijack an aircraft? and astonishingly, there was a bit of a breakdown between negotiations between the communications between the cabin and the flight deck, and the captain was never warned of this. So very early hours of the morning, as I said, it was about 5 to 5 universal time, GMT.
Yeah.
And he did his wandering then, and he wandered up the stairs, and on the upper deck there was a club class,
Yeah.
and he wandered in there. And so he was doing this very stealthily and not causing any problems that anyone would notice. And with it being so quiet, he was able to do that undetected. And so he hovered outside the flight deck for a little while until he decided to make his attack.
Now, because we always have this idea, don't we, that during a flight the pilots are at the controls, and there's three at the front. There's three in the cockpit, and the cabin door is locked, the cockpit door is locked because of obviously what we'd seen happening not that long before that, I suppose. So how does he actually? Does he knock on the door and say, hi, I've got a cup of tea for you here? And is it because the captain's not on the flight deck, is he, at the time? Because again, we think that captains are always there all the time, but they are on a long flight like this. It's the plane itself is on autopilot, presumably.
Yes. Okay. We need to set the scene a little better than that, because this was actually pre-9/11.
Okay.
It wasn't afterwards. It was before then, and it was quite common for airlines not to lock the door in flight because it was considered to be a restriction if there was an emergency where crews couldn't come and go as required. And so a lot of airlines did not lock the door, although they did have it shut. And so the three crew, one of them was a relief pilot who, when one of them was having a rest, he would fill in. And so there would normally be two pilots on control. And this aircraft, the 747, was designed to be flown by two pilots. So you would have two on the flight deck and then one of them resting in this particular flight. And it happened to be the captain at that stage. But the other thing to make clear was that the bunk area was actually on the flight deck. It wasn't separate. You could go straight from into the bunk from the flight deck and from the bunk to the flight deck. But he was sleeping in there.
Yeah.
Now, what happened, of course, is that when you've only got two pilots, there's going to be a moment when one of them may want to leave. And so that's acceptable, and proper precautions are taken. And then the one pilot can leave, maybe go to the toilet or whatever it might be. And that's exactly what happened at that point. And nobody really quite knows, but the attacker may have spotted that and saw a chance to go in the flight deck with seeing one pilot leave. And so he went to the door and he just opened the door and very silently went in there. And the next thing he knew, there was one co-pilot on duty on the right-hand seat. And the next thing he knew was this guy was standing there. And when he held the door open, he thought it was the other pilot returning, when in fact it was this attacker. And he stood there for only a few moments, and then he threw himself at the co-pilot and took control, grabbed the controls.
When you say he'd gone through a bunk area, so you've got club class and then a bunk area. So when you say bunk area, is that presumably...
No. The first class is downstairs.
Right.
Forget that. This was club class.
Yes. So
and then there was the entrance door to the flight deck.
Yeah.
And then there was a little corridor down there, and on the left-hand side of the corridor was where the bunk area was.
Got you.
So forward of that would be where the door was for the bunk area, and on the right there would be a library for all the books and for the aircraft and so on.
Sure.
And then you would come into the actual flight deck itself where the controls were.
So he flings himself at the co-pilot, or the person behind the stick, or whatever it is,
Yes.
and then he just literally starts. I don't know. I mean, he just starts soaring manically at the controls.
Well, that's about it. What he did was he threw himself sideways like a goalkeeper trying to catch a ball, and he landed with his side on the co-pilot's lap, and his back was on the co-pilot's chest, and then he managed to get one hand on the left hand of the control yoke with the co-pilot jammed in his seat like that. And then he started to move that very vigorously and basically over 3 minutes flew the aircraft all over the sky.
Well, you say flew the aircraft. I mean, that's again, along with fracas, that's another misnomer.
Yes,
yes.
Well, you can call it flying, although because the aircraft was flying, but it was actually putting in these very violent manoeuvres. But he was a very, very big, strong man, and fortunately, the co-pilot was quite a strong, big fella himself. So he managed to get his hand underneath the attacker and get his hand on the right hand of the control column, the control yoke, we call it. And the attacker had his left hand on the control, and so they were fighting each other like this. So at no time did the attacker take full control of the aircraft. It was more like a competition. It was like two gladiators fighting in the Roman Forum, who were each trying to win the other and to win total control of the aircraft. And this went on for 3 minutes, with the aircraft being thrown all over the place.
I was going to say, because this is, I mean, when you say somebody's taking control of the aircraft, the thing that I thought of when I first saw this was the tragic crash in, I think it was over Russia, probably about 30 years ago now, where the pilot's down the back and he's left his son in the front of the plane.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you remember that one, of course. And the kid got hold of the control stick, and of course his father's the captain's at the back. He doesn't make it to the front of the plane at the time because it's gone into a spin, hasn't it? This is somewhat different. I mean, presumably there's a lot of shouting and screaming at this point, and you know, it's not that sort of unruffled bomber command that we sort of think with pilots will sometimes say.
Well, actually, there wasn't that much. He didn't say a sound, the attacker.
Right.
He just leapt at this guy. And so the co-pilot was totally taken by surprise. And most of his effort and grunting was going into trying to fight the inputs of the attacker. But obviously, he started calling out for help. But with one co-pilot off the flight deck and one captain in the bunk asleep, he was having trouble to get someone to come and help him, and so that's why it went on for 3 minutes.
Now, if anybody's seen the Denzel Washington film, you know that there's a part in the film where the plane is inverted, i.e. it goes on it flips over. And this is this true? At one point, it actually inverts the aircraft. No,
he didn't. He didn't manage to do that.
Right.
As I mentioned, each time he tried to do something, there was a co-pilot who was fighting furiously to prevent it. But what he did do, he actually turned the aircraft so that the wings were going through the vertical, and it got right round to 94 degrees.
Whoa.
And that was the nose at that point was 35 degrees down. This was the most severe point. And there, the co-pilot managed to use all his strength to tug this control column back to bring him away from the vertical. Because had it continued from there and gone upside down, there would have been no recovery. The aircraft would have been lost.
Presumably, that's putting a huge amount of strain on its component parts, because it's. I mean, these things are sturdy, but they're not. You know, can they withstand that sort of yawing and pitching? And 94 degrees is quite a and erratically as well. It's quite a big ask of the aircraft.
It is, yes. And had it been flying at any great speed, it may have broken up. But what was happening was he was pulling back in the controls. The aircraft was going up and up and up. The speed was dropping off. And so most of these maneuvers were happening at very slow speed, which meant that the aircraft was not under the greatest of stress. Now, if a control column moves, the stress on there is related to the square of the speed, which is quite strong. So the slower you go, the less stress there are on controls or on the aircraft, and that's why it didn't break up. In fact, it was completely undamaged. Everything was happening at such slow speed.
If you're in the back, though, if you're a passenger on this flight, though, you have no idea what's going on. It must have been the most horrifying experience, because you're just getting, you can't see, it's like being on a ridiculous roller coaster ride. You're going up, you're going down, you're tilting over. It must have been, hopefully none of us will ever go anything like through that again.
Well, yes. I mean, it was horrendous for the passengers. There were so many things going on there. that it was absolutely frightening because not only was the aircraft being tossed around the sky, there's very violent movements of the controls for the bank angle, for pitch, and also for the way in which it was being managed. And so the aircraft they were jumping around all over the place. At one point, it was more like a barrel roll where the aircraft, no, I beg your pardon, like a roller coaster, where the aircraft was going up and down. And when it hit the top, then it would just go back down again. And people that had not fastened their seatbelts were hitting the ceiling. There was all sorts of bits flying all over the place, the articles belonging to the passengers. The overhead racks where they were storing their hand luggage, they were breaking down, breaking open, and bits were flying around. The noise when the aircraft was stalling. Now, stalling is where the aircraft gets to the point where it's going so slowly that there's insufficient lift on the wings, and it will drop flat from the sky at a very great speed of rate of knots. And that happened twice. Whoa. So in each of these occasions on this roller coaster, when it went to the top, then they would, on the way up, they'd be pressed into their seats. On the way down, they would feel the sense of negative G. And that happened 2 times. And one of the dives was 10,000 feet in about 20 seconds. It was so fast. It was the recorder. It was off the edge of the recorder to record the rate of descent. So this is the kind of level of the event that we're coping with. Also the way it vibrated, the aircraft vibrated absolutely unbelievably because of the turbulence. Yeah, and also the noise was horrendous. The passenger said it was like throwing rocks against the fuselage. The engines were still going. The auto throttle that controlled the power was still acting. So when they were climbing up fast, the engine would start opening up and whining at a great noise. And then at the top, when it went down, the thrust levers were closed, and then it went all quiet. Yeah. And so this is what they have to cope with. The call bells in the on the interphone in the galleys were ringing, lights were flashing on and off. It was like a horror movie.
I mean, you just say that it stalled twice. Now, this is a big. Here we go. This is a big bit of kit. Presumably, if you stall a 747, you don't just sort of depress the clutch and go again. I mean, that must have been. I mean, how should you get an aircraft that stalled sort of back online, as it were?
Well, it's a well-practiced maneuver. Yeah. And basically, you have to push the nose down and put the power on, so that when they went over the top, and he was the co-pilot was managing to get the control column forward, it was coming down, right, and so it would pick up speed, and then it would come out of the stall. The problem was the attacker would then pull back in the control column, and it would start going back up again. So, and one of the worst points was when the attacker had the control column forward, because it was going down at great speed, and trying to pull the attacker and the control column back when you had the weight of the attacker on the controls was very difficult.
Thankfully, the captain, is it Captain Hagen, who manages to get
Captain Bill Hagen? Yes,
yeah, manages to get into the flight deck, and presumably he I was going to say, but he renders the attacker inoperative. I mean, they met a combination of the remaining crew and passengers managed to scramble into the flight deck and get this madman off the controls.
Yes, well, the captain was woken up by the noise about halfway through, and he was a little bit concerned about going out there because he assumed there was 2 pilots there. Yeah, and because it was so violent, he was worried that he might go out there and get thrown about and cause more problems. So he waited a little while until it calmed down, and then he rushed out into the flight deck to find this attacker on top of the co-pilot. Now, the co-pilot then shouted at him to get him off, which he tried to do with some difficulty. And he was pulling at his jacket. The jacket came off, and then he started pulling at the torso. And then when he started pulling quite hard on his legs and his torso to get him off, he found that with the attacker holding the control column, he could pull the control column back. So when they got into a dive, the captain was then trying to control the aircraft as well by pulling the attacker back and pulling him out of the dive. So
you can laugh about it now, but obviously, I mean, it's just...
I know, yes. Oh, no, I mean, it was just horrendous. And so as he was doing this was causing the aircraft to go into a roller coaster situation again, with it going up and down and up and down. But eventually the captain realized he had to do something quite significant to get there. Yeah. And the story goes that his son had asked him at some time what he would do if attacked by a shark, and he said he would poke it in the eye. And so that's what he did. He pushed his finger as far as he could into the attacker's eye. And the first time it didn't work, and he couldn't believe that this guy was so strong that he could cope with that. Yeah. So the next time he decided he was going to put it in as far as he could go and try and get through to the brain. And then at that moment, he let go of the controls, and the two of them fell back onto the floor in the flight deck. So then he had a problem of trying to stop this guy getting back again. But very fortunately, the co-pilot that was the relief co-pilot that had taken a rest, that had gone for a short break, he came back on the flight deck, and the two of them started then trying to control the captain, trying to control the attacker. Yeah. But even they were struggling. So the captain then had another great idea. He started shouting at help to the passengers. And so there's a few passengers on the upper deck club class that heard the call, and they opened the door and they came in and they piled on top.
I mean, to open
and rescued the moment.
To open the door and see the two of the flight crew, two captains wrestling with a hefty attacker. I mean, that's just like, okay, fair enough. We only got 6 minutes, so let's cut to the quick. The plane thankfully lands. No loss of life. So obviously some people have been injured by being tossed around. There's a reason why you should always wear your seatbelt on a flight, obviously. But no sort of life. Nobody is mortally wounded in the actual in being thrown around, Stanley.
None of the passengers were hurt. Only minor injuries, right. But. One cabin crew member was caught in the galley with one of the violent turns, and she was thrown across the galley and she broke her leg. Oof. But that wasn't actually known at the time. Somehow that was also not passed on to the captain, and it was only when it arrived in Nairobi that the broken leg was diagnosed.
So I'd never heard of this, and this is the sort of thing that. Everybody knows about the pilot the pilot got sucked out when the window blew on the flight. Yes. Yeah, that's in his home, but so everybody knows about that. This is much more horrendous, dramatic, the whole thing, and yet we never heard about it. So this is a cover up. This is why have we not heard, Stanley, about this? The British Airways flight that almost had a very tragic end.
Well, it's a complicated story. So very briefly, the Air Accident Investigation Board did not investigate it, and neither did the Sudanese. They were entitled to do that, but both declined. And that was the reason for that was because it was classed as a serious incident, and it's not obligatory to have an investigation of a serious incident. But British Airways conducted their own investigation, and also the Civil Aviation Authority in the UK, they did a review of that. They also produced an abridged review of that. Now, the first review they did included information from 9/11, so they were not prepared to release that.
Yeah.
But they were going to release the abridged one. But none of these reports were released. They were all withheld. British Airways withheld the release, and the CAA withheld both of the releases. So there was no information out there for this to be carried on, and it sort of just disappeared into the background.
I mean, if you have an investigation, lessons can be learned from this. Presumably, so you know
Absolutely.
why I can't understand why this it's only a serious incident. I mean, this is an absolute. But for the grace of God, this could have been the third worst aviation incident. I mean, if it gained control and crashed the plane, I mean, nobody would have walked away from that one. So this would have been a major plus on the ground. I mean, here we are, 37 years after Lockerbie or whatever. I mean, we know ground injuries as well. So. Presumably, this must have been sort of shock and horror amongst two quick questions. We've got 3 minutes. Shock and horror amongst the passengers, and B, what happened to the obviously troubled young man who seized control of the flight?
Well, once again, it's complicated, but
Right.
he got off with it. It was decided that he was of unsound mind and not fit for trial, and so he was set free.
Good grief.
And yes, and he went on to get married and have children. So there you go.
Okay. So why the book? I mean, it's just to highlight the incredible bravery and the training of the crew. I mean, what was the point? What was the point? What was the reason behind the book, Stanley?
Well, the real reason was because no one knew about it, and they should know about it, and there was all sorts of things going on that were covered up, and so the book was mostly a story about the event, but half of it is also about the cover-ups that were going on, and it gets quite complicated. I don't think we have time to do this, but it's sufficient to say that these reports never saw the light of day, and they should have. Yeah,
because I mean, Captain Hagen and the rest of the crew surely should have been, they should be known as for their heroic actions and wresting control for the plane back.
Yeah, they did receive lots of rewards, and they did receive the British Airways Safety Medal and so on.
Right.
So it was recognised in the public, but what had actually happened and the details of it were never released.
Now, presumably, actions have been taken so that this never happens again, because obviously just before Christmas, a lot of people will be listening to this about to get on flights to come to Spain or go back to the UK.
Maybe the wrong time. Yeah.
Exactly. So presumably there are valuable lessons that have been learned from this, Stanley.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, there was a great deal of work done on why this guy managed to get on board in the first place. And British Airways did acknowledge that if the systems had been better, then he may not have been allowed to board. And that's really where it all starts. And then, of course, the captain had to make a decision on whether he would carry this passenger or not. But he had no idea whatsoever about what had been going on with him because he'd been acting very, very strangely in the transit. And he was supervised by an agent who witnessed all this but didn't really think it was worth telling the police about it. And the police were called. They were there as well. So how the captain was supposed to cope with this, with all this going on the ground, it was just not possible. The
book is called Terror Over Africa. You can order it via our own virtual bookstore. It is by Stanley Stewart. Stanley, I'm going to run out of time. Thank you so much for your time today.